Welcome to the Inspired Hygiene Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Wall. I'm an RDH and founder of Inspired Hygiene. For over 20 years, we've had the unique opportunity to see what really happens inside thousands of dental hygiene ops and what it takes to create transformational change that impacts the lives of patients, practice owners, and teams. Each season, we'll focus on one powerful topic, breaking it down with practical strategies, real stories, and tools you can use right away. Let's get into it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Inspired Hygiene Podcast. I am excited today to be talking about the challenges that a lot of practices are having with hygiene scheduling and hygiene scheduling backlogs. And for this topic, I brought on the incredible Connie Simmons. Hi, Connie. Welcome.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks for having me. So excited to be here.
Absolutely. I'm excited for you to be here and for you to chime in on this. I cannot wait to hear your insight. This is a topic that we have talked about a lot with our clients that we work with at Inspired Hygiene. You are a lead hygiene productivity coach with Inspired Hygiene. And I have loved working with you over the last few years. We've done a couple really cool projects together. What would you like to share with everybody about yourself and your hygiene journey?
Oh, it's been a long hygiene journey. I've had the amazing opportunity of being licensed now in 9 different states. So aside from being a coach, I still work clinically a few days a week. And I think that being a coach makes me a better clinician. And I think being a clinician makes me a great coach. And a lot of these topics that we're talking about on your podcast, right? I see them. I feel them every single day, not only from our clients, but from a personal side as well. So I'm just super honored to be able to do both. And I love dental hygiene.
And that is why I wanted your perspective, because you do have this unique perspective and you've worked clinically in a lot of different models, and you've seen with coaching clients different models, and you have also seen the fallout of what we have all experienced over the last few years in several different extremes. So that is why I felt like you were the perfect person to join me on this particular podcast. So what we know is that the problems that we're facing now in dentistry, in particular in dental hygiene, with this particular topic, scheduling and hygiene capacity, they're different. The problems we're having now are different than the problems that we had even 6-8 years ago. So pre-COVID, a lot of the practices that we worked with were seeing open time. So open time was very often a thing that we were really helping teams work on, reducing that amount of open time, unutilized hygiene time. Now, I would say the majority of the practice owners that we speak with or practice leaders that we speak with, they're experiencing the opposite. They don't have enough time to get patients into the hygiene schedule. So when we have different problems, we must look at different solutions. And so what I'm going to ask you as you're listening today is keep an open mind. We hear, Connie, you and I hear a lot from hygienists, dentists, practice managers. We hear, well, that won't work in my practice. And so we're going to talk about this situation and give you some actionable ideas and maybe some creative, different ideas. And so just keep an open mind. So I've got a few questions for you, Connie. But before I jump into those, anything that you want to share about keeping an open mind?
Yeah, and I will agree that that's probably one of the biggest things that we hear when we initially do a discovery with our clients is that's never going to work in my office, right? So they're very, very close-minded from the start. And I would just encourage you to think outside of the box. We have issues that now that we've not seen before in dentistry and dental hygiene and scheduling. So now we have to get into that uncomfortable zone so that we can together come up with solutions that's going to benefit everyone, but mostly it's going to benefit our patients, which is the reason why we came into healthcare in the first place.
Absolutely. Yeah, that saying life begins at the end of our comfort zone. That is so so true. Oh, and I will say too, as we start this episode, thank y'all for if you're on episode 3 for hanging in with me. Um, I realized I didn't know this, but being a host on a podcast is much different than being a guest on a podcast. And so I've had to take off, that teacher, that presenter hat and become a little bit more curious. So I'm going to really work. We're going to ask some questions here and we're just going to see where this goes. And I'm really enjoying getting out of my comfort zone as a guest and being a host and seeing how this flows. So thanks everybody for being here, and we'd love your comments and feedback and how we can continue to improve this podcast. So, all right, first question, Connie. We are hearing more and more with the teams that we encounter, whether they're prospective clients or current clients, they're people we run into on social media, in any of our presentations, we're hearing more and more about hygiene schedules being booked out for 6 months, 8 months. How do you see this backlog affecting? So, three things, right? We always talk about that triple win. How do you see this backlog affecting patient care, the hygiene team, and also practice profitability? And we can break those down one at a time. First, how do you see this affecting patient care?
So first of all, let's just talk about that word, right? The triple win.
Mm,
I think with some of the things that we're going to be talking about, right, we're going to see this as a triple threat because
mm,
to all three of those parties that we're going to discuss, right, it's uncomfortable and not the best case scenario for any of us in some of the cases, but mainly for our patients. So let's talk about let's talk about the access to care, right, for our patients. We came into healthcare to provide optimal healthcare for our patients. If we can't see them in our chair, we're not able to provide optimal healthcare. So the access to care for our patients is the biggest thing, right? We're trying to talk to them when they're in our chair about how their health is affecting their periodontal disease, how their HbA1c, how all of these things are so important, yet we can't get them in our chair to actually help treat their disease and get them healthier. So it is an access to care, definitely. And we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the alternate models that are being kind of evolving in our profession right now to deal with that access to care. But I think above all else, the issue is affecting our patients primarily the most because many of them want ideal health care, right? They're looking to us to provide it. They're listening to us. They trust us. But I'm sorry, I can't see you for 8 months. That
mm.
completely devalues everything we just talked about with our patient. And it's very, very frustrating from a clinician's point, right? So let's move into how it feels as a clinician.
Yeah.
I think that we find all too often that many of our teams that we coach know going into our day, I have no place to put these patients, right? So what do? We assess. We know that they're not really a prophy, but being the heroic healthcare provider that we are going to do our best and we're going to treat that patient to the best of our ability. So back to how it feels as a provider, right? I'm doing way more in a prophylactics appointment than what belongs in that appointment. I'm treating their active disease, but I know that I don't have room to see them in 2 months or 3 months or 4 months or 6 months. So I'm going to do the best that I can today, and I'm going to document the heck out of it. And then I'm going to reassess that patient when they come in. So I'm working harder, and we all have heard before working smarter, not harder. That completely is the opposite of that, right? So we are doing the best that we can. We are providing premier, ideal patient care, but we know that we can't get them back for the care that maybe we've already done our hygiene assessment, our diagnosis leads us down that road. So it's very, very frustrating as a clinician as well. And we hear this time and time again from our teams. Where am I going to put them? Where am I going to put them?
Yeah. So let me chime in here. When you say you're putting yourself in this position of the hygienist that is in a practice that is trying to do the best they can, and yet the schedule is booked out 4 to 6 months because maybe they lost a hygienist and they haven't been able to fill that spot. Or maybe they have what they have historically seen as a full hygiene team, but they've never caught up from that backlog of maybe there was a time where, they had a gap in their hygiene capacity. Maybe somebody was out on maternity leave and they didn't have a temp come in to fill in, and they're just, this backlog just gets to the point where you feel like you can never catch up.
Right.
But that's not what, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, when a lot of the teams that we coach, right, are maybe in an area of the country where they don't have access to substitute hygienists, temporary hygienists, guest hygienists, right? And if they have a hygienist that gets sick or that needs to be out for family leave or whatever, then what happens, right? That backlog happens. And if we don't try to assume some of that backlog as we go, we get ourselves into this backpedaling situation that we feel like we can't ever get out of as a clinician. And we hear that very often from many, many of our hygiene teams. Hey, Sally had to take a leave of absence for a year, but we couldn't find anyone to replace her. So what happened to all of Sally's patients? Right. So it's a fair question, and it's frustrating.
Yes. So it creates this vicious cycle. So picture this in your mind with me of a wheel, and things this cycle just keeps continuing until there is some breaking point, or until a leader recognizes timeout. We have to intervene here to stop this cycle. So what you put yourself into the position a moment ago of that hygienist that's in that practice, and you're doing an assessment, and you want to do the best thing for the patient, but you can't get them in for 4, 6, 8 months. And so you just do the best you can that day, and you think, okay, I'll check this level of inflammation the next time. But the next time you see them, unless you've done something different, you're in the same position that you were 6 months ago. So then this patient just stays in this chronic state of inflammation, even though the hygienist is doing the best that they know to do in this vicious cycle, right? The cycle is a lack of hygiene capacity, then leads to a lack of available hygiene appointments. Then that leads to a lack of truly a comprehensive diagnosis, because sometimes the hygienist is running behind because they've been trying to treat disease in a prophy, or they've left things out, diagnostic pieces out, like regular and complete periodontal charting or oral cancer screenings. They've left things out because the more that these patients the longer they stay in the cycle, the more their disease is silently progressing, and the more work it takes for the hygienist to keep up with that, right? So that lack of comprehensive diagnosis, and then that leads to a lack of variety of hygiene services, to more of that just kind of prophy mill. Then that leads to lower hygiene production, and that leads to lack of profitability. And then this cycle just keeps continuing until somebody recognizes that, hey, we're on this hamster wheel and we've got to stop. And that's often the time that they come to us. They're asking for some guidance on that. So that is absolutely how this backlog is affecting patient care. It's affecting the hygiene team and their ability to fully practice in their full scope of practice. And then ultimately, leading to just it being one prophy after another, it affects practice profitability as well.
And burnout, right? We're burnout.
100%.
Who wants to do a bloody prophy for 8 hours of the day and feel like you're not getting anywhere, right? You're beating yourself up. The patient isn't benefiting from it. The practice is not benefiting from it. And it's just like you said, over and over. And it feels like every single day is Groundhog Day, right? Because that's all we have the capability and ability to do with the way that it is now. So getting off of that has to happen, and it has to happen in a systematic way, right? It's not this way one day and the next day it's completely different. That's where some great coaching, right, that we do when we come in. It's a systematic approach. And we really just brainstorm to try to figure out together how we can figure this problem out, and everyone benefits. All three of those parties benefit in that triple win.
So what do you see as some, and we'll get to some systems here in a moment that need to shift in that situation, right? If a practice is in that situation, what do you see as some mindset shifts that need to happen to break that cycle?
Many times we hear, we already talked about it, right? It's never going to work here. If you come in on the negative side of things, from an administrative, right? We hear that very, very often from practice administrators, the onus, the practice administrator, it's never going to work here. So how can we expect our teams to ever have belief that anything else can be successful if we come in with that negative side of things from the start, right? So we have to believe that change, even though it's uncomfortable, can lead to amazing things. And
Yes.
That uncomfortable zone is a place where I will tell you that although I don't love being there, I know that that's where I change and where I grow the most. And that is so common that when we go into teams and we do institute different systems and processes to help enhance things, it's uncomfortable. And I expect them to be reaching out to me with emails and questions and concerns and conflicts. That's part of that growth process. And I think that if people are just so intimidated by making the change, and that's never going to work for us, and that and this is the way it's always been, and this is the way it's always going to be, and we're going to just keep going, we're going to clock in and we're going to clock out, and we're going to be okay with that. And unfortunately, that's not the position that we want to be in. We're healthcare providers, and our patients are depending on us to be as such. So I think just getting out of that stuck mindset, right? And opening up doors and knowing it's going to be uncomfortable and being okay with the uncomfortableness.
Well, and I think when you feel like you have support, so knowing there's going to be some uncomfortable times, but also knowing that your coach and your team and your leaders have your back can help you move through those things. So I will say that we do occasionally hear, and when we share with you some of our ideas about scheduling models for hygiene, that's where a lot of that comes up, that resistance, and we'll talk through some of those things here in just a moment. I will say most of the teams that we work with, when they're reaching out to us, they know that they want to do something differently. And so they're open in general. They're open to coaching. They're open to changes. They're open to elevating their communication between each other and their diagnostic processes and all of that. But even when they show up and they say, we're so glad you're here and we're open, there's almost always, typically at least one thing that we might suggest that you see some resistance come up. But we really work with them to help them know and help them see how it creates that triple win. So if it is a scheduling system, we can break it down. Let's see, how is this a benefit to your patients? How is it a benefit to the hygienist and the team? How is it a benefit to the practice? And once they see that and we can bring that to light, then they are so much more willing to step out of that comfort zone. And so what I hear you saying is the growth mindset, having that growth mindset is so important to implementing anything that's going to create improvements, because staying in this vicious cycle, it does lead to burnout, because like you said, it leads to burnout. It leads to doing the same thing over and over, having that Groundhog Day experience. And that can only go on for so long. And I will say that in the position that we're in this current time that we're recording this podcast, there are some changes that are being proposed in a particular state, and I predict that this will happen more in more states this year. And they are drastic changes that are being proposed for hygiene education and hygiene licensing. Is that we cannot any longer show up and clock in and do the same thing over and over. We must, as hygienists, as dental professionals in general, we must differentiate ourselves and stand out and really work to be those true healthcare practitioners to really step into that role. And that requires that growth mindset. It requires the ability and the willingness to continually be learning and shifting things. And that is just that's part of what we committed to. That is part of the dental hygiene oath is always continually growing our skills for the best of those that we serve. So yeah, go ahead. I want to hear you talk about all that.
I'm just going to say, I just think kind of piggybacking on that, I think one of the most enjoyable parts that when we are in offices coaching and we talk to our hygiene teams about elevating their role into a mid-level care provider, right? We are not tooth scrapers. We're not tooth cleaners. We are providing care for our patients that took us years to accumulate all of this knowledge and expertise in our field. And
yes.
If we don't see ourselves as that person, how are we ever going to expect our patients to see us as that person? Right. So
yes,
I love it. That to me is the best part of our visits when we go in. And at the end of our visit, finally, the hygiene team is like, you know what? I'm ready to step into this role and I am ready to knock the socks off of this and just see the healthiest patients I've ever had. So I just wanted to add in that elevating ourselves where we belong is huge. And it gets us out of that rat race of that Groundhog Day of every day. It's another bloody prophy, and it's another prophy, and it's another prophy, right? How do we think that dental assistants, our best dental assistants, right? Those expanded duty dental assistants that tell us when we're in offices, I don't know how the hygienist just does the same thing over and over and over every day. I love crown and bridge, and I love doing implants, and I love doing surgery, and I love doing. That tells us that we don't have an expanded service mix, right, within that hygiene team, because we as a hygienist, we should not feel like every patient is going to be the same thing, right? We have those diagnostic skills that we're going to apply during our assessment to determine what sort of care that patient needs. So that we know when we hear that from teams that it just feels like a prophy after a prophy after a prophy, right? That we need to expand our hygiene services so that we can better take care of our patients, and organically our practice production will go up as a result. So back to that triple win.
So I love that. And it's very energizing for teams and for hygienists to have those realizations that they don't have to just do the same thing and be on that hamster wheel for years. Yeah. So let's talk about some creative, maybe even controversial scheduling strategies. And your mention of the dental assistant really brings this to light. You and I developed last year what we call the Assisted Hygiene Online Boot Camp to give dental teams that are interested in assisted hygiene a high quality way to implement that in their practice, a way to tailor utilizing that to their practice philosophy so that it will work in their practice. And I think it's fair to say that you and I are pretty proud of that product.
Yeah, very, very proud of that product. And I just want to point out from the start, and we hear this in so many of our teams that we go into, the minute we say assisted hygiene, they automatically go accelerated hygiene. It's faster. It's faster.
Yeah.
Everything's going in a high speed. I'm not going to be able to keep up with it. That is not what we are coaching. That is not what we are talking about. I have had the opportunity to work on both sides of that scenario, right? As a temporary hygienist. So my philosophy is whenever I change states, I would go in, and in the area I wanted to work, I would be a temp hygienist, right? I'd be a guest hygienist, just so I kind of gathered the culture of the hygiene area, the drive, the commute time, right? Um, and many times I would walk in and it would be that accelerated 30-minute, 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 and I'd be seeing 14 to 16 patients a day. And I never wanted to go back there, right? That's burnout. That was the epitome of burnout. And
Yeah.
that's not what a true assisted hygiene program is. And so many times I just think there's so much confusion because maybe a hygienist, that's the only way they've ever been exposed
Yeah.
to this assisted model. But when we come in and we talk about why is it that on the dental side of things, our team members, our dental providers, and our patients are very, very accustomed to having a dental assistant and a dentist working as a team. Why is it so outside of the box that a hygienist and a dental assistant can't do the exact same thing? And I don't think that many people think about it like that. I mean, do you agree? You hear that?
I do agree. And I think, Connie, I think your comment about accelerated hygiene, I think that is the immediate first assumption. And that's why we even hear dentists say, I don't think that'll work in my practice. My
Yeah.
patients are used to having that time with the hygienist. And it's not their fault because somewhere along the line they encountered that. And I'm in the same I have the same opinion of you. I've seen it happen and I wouldn't want to work that every day. There are some hygienists that love it. And hey, if it works for you and your patients are satisfied and you like it and you have a system down, I am not here to knock that. What we're here to say though is that is not the only way to utilize a dental assistant effectively and productively in a hygiene department. So let's talk about some of these creative hygiene models. And some of these you may have already tried, and some of these you may have never heard of. But again, just keep an open mind and think about how this might work in your practice. So let's start with assisted hygiene because we've already kind of gone down that road. You've already said it. This is very similar to how an assistant works with a dentist. You have a dedicated hygiene assistant. The hygienist and the assistant are working out of two rooms. I think that's a big piece too, Connie. And I know we could do a whole podcast just on assisted hygiene. So we're gonna try to like hold back on that, but we will do that at some point. The one thing that I would say also that creates a bad impression of assisted hygiene is when a hygienist has been working two rooms. So maybe they've been seeing, instead of 8 patients a day, maybe they've seen 11 or 12 patients, but the assistant that's working with them is really only helping them when they have time between the dentist's patients.
Yeah.
And that really isn't fair to set up that model and not have full support. So that's really what we're talking about with assisted hygiene, is where that hygienist is working out of 2 columns with a dedicated assistant, and they're seeing maybe 50% more patients in that second column. And it is a dance, right? The hygienist is not just only doing scaling. There are a lot of other things that they can do when they have that support. And think about what you can offer your patients, from wellness scans to scanning for whitening and all these different things when you have that partner in care. So that's a really cool, effective way to work. And we've even seen some practices who lost a hygienist, and because they felt like they had such a great, tight team culture within their hygiene department, they didn't want to bring anyone else in right away. And they said, you know what, let's try this.
Yep.
And so I actually interviewed, I think it's on our YouTube channel, I interviewed a hygienist that did just that. And I would encourage you to go check. Actually, we can link it. We'll put a link in the notes to that video. Listen to her explanation of how they did it because it ended up being a very positive thing that they love, and it's now a permanent part of their practice, or a permanent part for now. So that's one way. Connie, what else?
And
What else have you seen?
um, when we talk about an assisted hygiene model, it doesn't have to be every hygienist every day of the week. And this is the
Right.
only way we're going to do things, right? Maybe you have 4 hygienists, and maybe out of those 4 or 5 clinical days, I'm only going to do assisted hygiene one of those 4 days, right? We don't mean every single office needs to add 8 columns of hygiene to get through this, right? It could be, hey, this week I'm going to work assisted hygiene, and next week I'm going to work a more conventional model, right? Depending on the availability of that assistant. And talking about that assistant, right? That's a key piece. It just can't be someone that we've decided to throw into this position, right? They are an extension of me. As a hygienist, whenever our assistant is in the room, they are working with us as a team, the same way that the dentist and their assistant works together. So that's an integral part of finding the right dynamic culture of mixing. So I just wanted to add in that it doesn't have to be we're assisted hygiene or we're not. It can be a model that works both ways, right? And a way to
Yes.
catch up some of that backlog. And
Yeah.
we found that some of our teams will say, okay, we're gonna work this for the next 3 to 6 months and see how it works. That doesn't mean you always have to do it, but it means that we're going to try something different to help dig us out of this recare hole that we're in right now, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Another thing that we found many of our clients very successful is doing an all-hygiene day. So maybe you have 10 available operatories, and maybe you don't see any restorative patients once a month, maybe on a whatever day, a Wednesday or a Thursday or a Friday, whatever. All hands on deck. Every hygienist that you can get. So if you have 10 ops, let's get 5 hygienists, and all of our assistants now are dedicated to our hygiene team. It is a great day for diagnosis, right? So much diagnosis comes out of those days because we have the doctor who's there to come in to do the exam. And in a well-orchestrated handoff, which is one of the biggest things that we talk about in assisted hygiene, is that it doesn't matter whether it's the assistant or whether it's the hygienist. We're making those handoff to those doctors. And we could even do bonus things on those days. Like we could run an Invisalign day, right? We can do Invisalign scans during that all hygiene day and increase our Invisalign production. There are so many opportunities where we could put a dent into that backlog without feeling like it has to be every day, all day down the highway.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It can be really fun too. Imagine not having to wait for doctor exams, right? They're there, they're ready and ready to support that diagnosis. I love that. I would say too, a couple other things, Connie, that we've seen really work is going out where you do see some space in your schedule and going ahead and starting to put priority blocks there. We work with teams to really give them specific recommendations on this. But if you're finding that, hey, we had a pretty robust perio program, 5 years ago or 3 years ago, and now we can't get those patients in. And so it's affecting our diagnosis, like we talked about earlier. One thing that helps is going out to where you see some space and put some perio blocks in the schedule or put new patient blocks in the schedule. If you're seeing that that is affecting, the backlog will absolutely affect new patient flow as well. So those are some things to consider there to help you accommodate those procedures and break out of that cycle. Now, you might say, well, that's great, but we're putting blocks, and so then it's going to back up our recare even more. You're right. So you've got to look for long-term strategic solutions. And again, one thing might be, we've mentioned this on previous episodes, one thing might be evaluating your insurance participation. If you have a plan that you've been thinking about releasing, this could open up some time on the hygiene schedule. So always evaluate those things as well. Um, we talked about working with dental assistants, and one of the things that we're seeing as what some of the changes in our industry is expanding duties for dental assistants. And Connie and I are both hygienists, and we absolutely want to protect the integrity of the dental hygiene license. And also, I love seeing other roles expand their opportunities as well. We want to see opportunities for hygienists participation in the practice expand with additional duties. We want to see the same thing for dental assistants. So I believe, Connie, you and I imagine having an expanded duties dental assistant that can do above the gum line scaling, and that patient has been thoroughly screened by the dentist and the hygienist, and they are healthy, and we can have the assistant see some of those patients. And at the very first sign of any type of inflammation, we have a really clear process in place for them to come back through, right? They're obviously going to have an exam by the doctor at least once a year. Maybe we alternate it. Maybe the assistant sees those healthy patients once, and the hygienist sees them once, so that things can be caught. I believe, and we haven't gotten into this yet enough with Inspired Hygiene to have a really set and clear process for this yet, but I believe that there is a way to do that well, and that could free up some time on the hygiene schedule. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I agree. I mean, from all the different states that I worked in, right? So in Ohio, I was an expanded duty hygienist where I could do fillings, right? How many of us now are local anesthetic license, right? In Virginia, where I worked, the dental assistants would go to additional training, and they ran their own column of crown and bridge delivery and partial delivery and all of that stuff that in many states, right? We are absolutely for working to the highest level that we can in terms of, because think about them, they're looking at their next step, right? What's their next step? How can they progress in the practice? How can they progress in the profession? And I think there is a place for, I just think we're going to have to be careful about how it gets instituted, right? So that our patients' health is at the foremost of what we're going to propose, because that's what it all comes down to. We want to make sure our patients are being well cared for. And there are some cases, I mean, look, many pediatric offices are already using high-level dental assistants to see the patients, and then the dentist will come in and do any above the gum scaling. But what if they could just pick up the scaler and remove that little bit of lower anterior calculus? They didn't have to come to a hygiene appointment. That frees up time in my schedule for my area of expertise, which is the health of the gums and the bone, the supporting structure, right? So I think that there's opportunity for our growth as hygienists. Right now, we can really hone in on our sickest patients. And while we're still overseeing the fact that our patients are going to be well taken care of, because we have those systems and processes in place that someone's going to be monitoring the health of that patient. So I agree. I think that this can be seen as a totally negative thing, which many people choose to go straight to the negative. But I think when we can turn it around and find the positivity that, wow, I can really excel in what I'm best at, right? I'm so happy that they're in my chair, because now I can use my skills to the highest level. So going back just a little bit, Rachel, talking about priority blocks, it reminded me a lot of times we coach our teams as well that, and I'll say that I have been guilty of this. When we see blocks in the schedule, maybe our front business team is like, oh, there's an opening. I got to fill it. I got to fill it. Right. So if we can, again, work on the mindset that we have faith that our hygiene team is going to be accurately diagnosing the disease on these patients, and they're going to need that cancellation of that hour and a half or hour, 2 hours, whatever it is that happened next week. Right. So for the time being, can we put a block on that until maybe 48 hours before the appointment. And then our front team can go back in and start using those call lists to fill those in. But I have every ability that those hygiene teams are going to see someone today that's very systemically sick and they need treatment next week. Guess what, Mrs. Jones? I have the opportunity to see you next week to get started on your therapy. And I would be more than honored to be able to do that. Right. So I think that, again, working on that mindset shift that it's an opening, it's a hole. I got to fill the hole, fill the hole, fill the hole. We often find that when we can start placing blocks besides those priority blocks, putting blocks on those cancellations, and trusting that our hygiene team is going to be filling those.
Yeah. Yes. And those are truly for priority care for those patients that need that treatment in a very timely manner. So I love that. Thank you for adding that amount of detail. Well, this has been amazing. This has been amazing. And I hope that this is encouraging to you all that there is a way to break out of the cycle. It takes some strategic long-term thinking. It takes stepping out of the comfort zone and really employing some possibly non-traditional ways of scheduling for hygiene. But Connie, I just value your input on this so much. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm one of the first people on the Inspired Hygiene podcast. So pretty amazing. I can't wait until our next session because we can talk about some assisted hygiene.
Absolutely. We'll have to do it. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Inspired Hygiene podcast. We hope you got a ton of value and some things that you can really take away and implement now. So as always, we invite you, if we can help you in any way to optimize your hygiene department, head on over to inspiredhygiene.com. And as always, stay inspired.